Hello, Capricorn. Today's reading already feels very emotional, very honest, and surprisingly urgent. As I sit with this energy, I can't help but feel like someone has been carrying something in their heart for much longer than they've admitted. There is a feeling here that silence has lasted long enough. Okay, what has been left unsaid may be becoming too heavy to ignore. This doesn't feel like a random thought or a passing emotion. It feels like someone is starting to realize what your presence truly means to them. Maybe they tried to push these feelings away. Maybe they convinced themselves they had more time. But something is changing. And here's the question. What happens when someone finally understands the value of what they almost lost? What happens when the fear of losing you becomes stronger than the fear of being vulnerable? Honestly, Capricorn, this reading feels like a wake-up call. A moment of truth. A moment where emotions that have been hidden beneath the surface begin asking to be heard. So trust your intuition, because the energy surrounding this connection feels different. Someone may be looking back, seeing things more clearly, and realizing that walking away from you is never as easy as they once believed. And let's get into your reading. The first thing catching my attention is the Judgment card. And wow, this doesn't feel subtle at all. It feels like somebody is being forced to look at something they have been avoiding for a very long time. Not because anyone is making them. Not because somebody is demanding answers. It feels like their own heart is no longer allowing them to look away. Capricorn, I keep getting this image of someone replaying old memories when nobody else is around. Sitting quietly, driving home, staring out a window, pretending everything is fine while their mind keeps drifting back to you. Back to conversations they barely appreciated at the time. Back to moments they thought would always be there. The interesting thing is that I don't feel like they understood your value when they had full access to you. They saw your consistency. They saw your loyalty. They saw how much effort you put into things. But they treated those qualities as if they would always be available. Almost like they assumed you would never change your mind. The Hermit card appears beside Judgment, and immediately the energy becomes quieter. More reflective, more personal. This person feels like they've been spending a lot of time alone with their thoughts lately. Not necessarily physically alone. Mentally alone. Emotionally alone. Because there are realizations happening here that nobody else can process for them. And what they're starting to see is uncomfortable. They're beginning to recognize how often you showed up with sincerity while they were distracted. How often you remained steady while they were uncertain. How often you were trying to build something genuine while they were focused on everything except what truly mattered. Yeah, there is a lot of self-reflection here. A lot of looking backward. A lot of wondering why certain things seemed so ordinary back then, but feel incredibly important now. Oh my God, Capricorn, it's almost like this person is discovering the emotional weight of your absence. Because sometimes people don't recognize value while they're experiencing it. They recognize it when it's no longer right in front of them. And that's where the Six of Cups start speaking. The moment I see this card, memories begin flooding into the reading. Not dramatic memories. Not necessarily huge life-changing events. Simple moments. The way you spoke. The way you listened. The way you made people feel understood. The way you stayed calm when situations became complicated. Things they barely noticed before are becoming impossible to forget now. And what feels important is that these memories aren't showing up as nostalgia alone. They feel connected to regret. Not overwhelming regret. More like a growing awareness. An awareness that they may have underestimated someone who is quietly becoming one of the most important people in their life. I keep hearing this thought repeating in their energy. I didn't see it then. Not because you hid who you were. Not because you weren't clear. Actually, Capricorn, I think you were very clear. Very authentic. Very consistent. The problem is that they were looking through the wrong lens. They were measuring value through temporary concerns, temporary fears, temporary distractions. And now those distractions seem much smaller than they once did. Meanwhile, your presence feels larger, more meaningful, more difficult to replace. There is something beautiful happening here, even if it's uncomfortable for them. Because this feels less like a person chasing after what they lost, and more like a person finally understanding what was standing in front of them all along. The Judgment card keeps pulling my attention back again. almost like their heart keeps returning to the same realization, the same truth, the same question. What if Capricorn was never asking for too much? What if Capricorn was simply offering something real? And the more they sit with that question, the harder it becomes to ignore everything they are beginning to feel. The Nine of Swords feels impossible to ignore here. The energy changes the moment I look at it. What started as reflection begins turning into worry. Deep worry. The kind that follows somebody into quiet rooms and keeps them company when nobody else is around. Capricorn, I keep feeling like this person has been trying to stay busy, trying to distract themselves, trying to convince themselves that everything is fine. Yet every time life slows down, every time there is a moment of silence, their thoughts seem to drift back toward the same place.
Toward you. Toward what happened. Toward what they didn't say.
Toward what they should have done differently. You know, sometimes regret doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it sneaks in little by little. A memory here. A realization there. A random reminder that appears out of nowhere and suddenly changes the entire mood of the day. That's exactly what this feels like. This person may be sitting at work and suddenly remember a conversation. They may hear a song and think of you. They may pass a familiar place and feel something tighten inside their chest. The Five of Cups is showing me somebody who keeps returning to moments they wish they could revisit. Not because they believe they can change the past, because they're finally seeing it from a different perspective. And honestly, Capricorn, that perspective is painful. Because they're beginning to recognize how often their attention was focused on things that ultimately didn't matter. People who weren't loyal, situations that weren't stable, problems that consumed their energy but offered very little in return. Meanwhile, something real was standing right in front of them. Something consistent. Something genuine. Something they quietly assumed would always be there. Oh my God, there is such a strong feeling of hindsight in this reading. You know that expression people use? You don't know what you've got until it's gone. I'm not saying you're gone. I'm not saying this connection is over. What I'm seeing is someone who is finally understanding that your presence was never something they should have taken for granted. The Four of Pentacles enters the reading, and immediately I notice how tightly they're holding onto these thoughts. They're not talking about them openly. They're not sharing everything they're feeling. This person feels guarded. Very guarded. Almost as if they're afraid to admit how much space you occupy in their mind. Because once they admit it, they have to face another truth. What if they've already waited too long? What if Capricorn is no longer standing in the same place? What if Capricorn has started creating a life that no longer revolves around them? That question feels heavy. Heavier than they expected. I keep seeing someone checking for signs, looking for clues, wondering how you're doing, wondering if you're happy, wondering if somebody else has stepped into the space they left empty. And what's interesting is that I don't feel jealousy as much as I feel fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of becoming a chapter in your story instead of a person still present within it. The memories connected to the Five of Cups keep surfacing. Not dramatic memories. Not necessarily the biggest moments. It's the small things. The little habits. The little routines. The way you showed care without asking for recognition. The way you stayed present when things became complicated. The way you carried yourself with quiet strength. Capricorn energy often does that. It doesn't always demand attention. It simply shows up. And sometimes people fail to understand the value of that until life becomes chaotic and they realize how rare consistency actually is. Yeah, that's something I keep hearing. They miss the feeling of stability. Not just you. The feeling they had around you. The feeling that somebody genuinely cared. The feeling that somebody was willing to stay when things weren't perfect. There is also a growing sense of self-blame here. Not harsh self-punishment. More like uncomfortable honesty. The kind of honesty that arrives when excuses stop working. Because I don't feel this person pointing fingers anymore. I don't feel them trying to justify everything. I feel somebody sitting quietly with their own decisions, their own choices, their own missed opportunities. And the Four of Pentacles keeps showing me someone holding on to a connection they are afraid is slipping further away each day. Not because Capricorn is trying to punish them. Not because Capricorn is creating distance out of spite. Something about your energy feels different to them lately. More independent, more self-contained, more focused on your own path. That realization seems to be creating a pressure inside them that they can no longer easily ignore. The more they try to push these emotions aside, the stronger they seem to return, almost as if their heart is asking them to stop running from something they've been avoiding for far too long. The Death card steps into the reading, and the atmosphere feels completely different. Not lighter, not heavier, just different. Like somebody standing in front of a mirror and finally being unable to look away from what they see. Capricorn, what strikes me about this energy is that it doesn't feel performative. It doesn't feel like somebody trying to impress you. It doesn't feel like somebody saying the right things because they know that's what people want to hear. This feels private, very private. Almost like changes are happening behind closed doors where nobody is clapping, nobody is congratulating them, and nobody even knows the effort they're making. Because real change is often quiet. Real change usually happens when there is nobody watching. And that's exactly what I keep seeing. Someone questioning old patterns. Someone becoming uncomfortable with behaviors they once defended. Someone looking at choices they used to justify and realizing they don't fit anymore. The Death card feels less like an ending and more like somebody slowly shedding a version of themselves they can no longer carry. There is a strange loneliness attached to growth. People don't talk about that very often. When you begin changing, there is usually a period where the old version of you is disappearing, but the new version hasn't fully arrived yet. That's where this person feels stuck. Somewhere in between. Not who they were. Not yet who they want to become. And honestly, Capricorn, I think that's harder than they're willing to admit. The Devil reversed catches my attention immediately afterward. Oh my God, this feels personal. Because I don't see somebody fighting against you. I see somebody fighting against themselves. Their habits, their fears, their excuses, their tendency to avoid difficult conversations. The stories they told themselves that allowed them to stay comfortable. I keep hearing the words, I can't keep doing this. Not directed toward you, directed toward their own life, directed toward parts of themselves that they know need attention. For some of you, this could even involve people around them, relationships that encourage unhealthy behavior, environments that keep them stuck, patterns they've repeated for years without questioning. Something about this energy feels like they're beginning to understand that the obstacle was never entirely outside of them. Part of it was inside them all along. And that's not an easy realization. Because once you see it, you can't really unsee it. The Devil reversed keeps showing me somebody cutting cords. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Slowly. One decision at a time. One boundary at a time. One uncomfortable truth at a time. I also feel like they're becoming more aware of how much fear has influenced their choices. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of commitment. Fear of disappointment. Fear of failing. Fear of meeting someone. Fear is a funny thing. It convinces people they're protecting themselves when sometimes they're actually protecting the very thing that's keeping them unhappy. Yeah, that feels important. Because this person seems to be discovering that some of the walls they built were never truly helping them. They were only keeping everyone out, including the people who genuinely cared. The Eight of Pentacles arrives, and suddenly, I notice effort. Consistent effort. Not dramatic gestures. Not grand speeches. Work. Actual work. The kind that nobody can do for them. The kind that requires patience. The kind that requires showing up repeatedly. Capricorn, if there is one energy that matches your nature, it's this. Growth through effort. Change through action. And strangely enough, I think this person is beginning to understand that. I keep seeing somebody wanting to become more reliable, more grounded, more honest. Not because they're trying to become perfect, because they're tired of disappointing themselves. The Eight of Pentacles feels like somebody learning new emotional skills. Learning how to communicate differently. Learning how to take responsibility differently. Learning how to stay present when situations become uncomfortable. And there is humility here. A lot more humility than before. They're beginning to understand that growth isn't about proving they're right. It's about becoming better. You know what keeps standing out? This person no longer seems focused on controlling outcomes. They're becoming more focused on controlling their own behavior, their own reactions, their own choices. That's a very different energy. A much more mature energy. I also get the feeling that they're noticing you from a new perspective. Not as someone they need to impress. Not as someone they need to win over. They're beginning to see you as an example of qualities they admire.
Discipline.
Integrity. Consistency.
Strength.
And that realization seems to be motivating them in ways they never expected. Because every step forward they take appears to be leading them closer to a question they haven't fully answered yet. A question sitting quietly beneath all of this growth, all of this effort, all of this inner work, one they seem to carry with them everywhere they go. The Page of Cups appears, and the energy softens immediately. Not because the fear is gone, not because every doubt has disappeared. Something about this feels more like a person standing at the edge of a conversation they have replayed 100 times in their mind. Capricorn, I keep seeing somebody rehearsing words, deleting messages before they send them, starting conversations in their head, imagining different outcomes, wondering what they would say if they finally had the chance to speak honestly. The interesting thing is that this person doesn't seem afraid of their feelings anymore. What they're afraid of is your response. That's where the hesitation lives. That's where the uncertainty keeps returning. Because there is a difference between admitting something to yourself and admitting it to another person. The Page of Cups feels like emotional honesty trying to find its voice. A very vulnerable voice. A voice that doesn't have all the answers. A voice that doesn't know exactly how to repair everything. A voice that simply wants to stop pretending. You know, Capricorn, I keep hearing someone say, I don't even know where to begin. And honestly, that feels genuine. Because there are moments in life when so much remains unsaid that finding the first sentence becomes harder than saying the entire truth. This person seems caught in that space, wanting to reach out, wanting to explain, wanting to acknowledge things they avoided before. Yet every time they get close, another question appears. What if Capricorn doesn't want to hear it? What if Capricorn has already moved forward emotionally? What if too much time has passed? The Knight of Cups enters the reading and suddenly I can feel movement beneath the surface. Slow movement. Careful movement. Not impulsive. Not reckless. Purposeful. It's almost as if the emotional distance between you and this person no longer feels comfortable to them. There is something restless here. A feeling that simply sitting with their thoughts is no longer enough. Because reflection can only take someone so far. Eventually feelings begin asking for action. Eventually the heart wants expression. And that's where this person seems to be arriving. Not fully there. Not completely confident. Just arriving. Oh my God, Capricorn, I keep getting the image of someone staring at their phone. Picking it up. Putting it down. Opening a conversation. Closing it again. Checking your profile. Wondering how you're doing. Wondering whether reaching out would be welcomed or ignored. There is a tenderness in this energy that wasn't present before. Less ego. Less defensiveness. More sincerity. The Knight of Cups feels like someone wanting to approach from the heart instead of from pride. And for some people, that's one of the hardest things they'll ever do. Because pride protects. Pride creates distance. Pride allows people to hide. Vulnerability doesn't offer those same protections. Vulnerability asks people to risk disappointment. Risk rejection. Risk hearing an answer they may not want to hear. That's exactly where the Two of Swords begins speaking. This card feels like hesitation. A crossroads. An internal debate that keeps repeating itself. Part of them wants to move forward. Part of them wants to stay safe. Part of them believes they should say something. Part of them wonders whether silence would hurt less. I don't get the feeling that they're confused about how they feel. That isn't what this is. The confusion seems connected to timing, to courage, to uncertainty about whether the door is still open. Because Capricorn, something about your energy feels different to them. Stronger, calmer, more independent. The version of you they're sensing no longer feels like someone waiting for answers. And strangely enough, that realization seems to be making them respect you even more. The more they observe your strength, the more they recognize the value of what they almost lost. Yet that same realization creates fear. Because strength can be admired from a distance. The question they're struggling with is whether they still have a place beside it. I also keep feeling that this person wants to explain themselves, not to excuse their behavior, not to rewrite history, just to finally let you see the things they never had the courage to say, the fears they carried, the insecurities they hid, the reasons they pulled away when they should have moved closer. There are so many unspoken emotions sitting between the lines of this reading. The Page of Cups keeps bringing them back to the surface. The Knight of Cups keeps nudging them forward. And the Two of Swords keeps asking the same difficult question over and over again as they stand there holding everything they've wanted to say. The Chariot enters the reading with a completely different feeling. There is movement here, but it doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel reckless. It feels like somebody who has spent a long time sitting with their thoughts and is finally realizing that thinking alone cannot carry them any further. Capricorn, I keep sensing a growing determination inside this person. Not perfection, not certainty, determination. The kind that develops after somebody gets tired of standing in the same emotional place for too long. You know, there comes a moment when the fear of staying where you are becomes greater than the fear of moving forward. That is exactly what this feels like. Something inside them seems to be shifting from reflection into action. Not because everything is suddenly clear. Not because all the risks have disappeared. Because they no longer want to be defined by hesitation. There is a quiet maturity surrounding this energy. A willingness to take responsibility for their own choices. A willingness to stop waiting for circumstances to magically change. The Chariot feels like somebody understanding that if they want a different outcome, they have to become part of creating it. And honestly, Capricorn, I think that's a lesson they've been learning for quite some time. The Justice card immediately catches my attention after that.
Oh wow.
This energy feels deeply sincere. Because what I'm seeing isn't someone trying to manipulate a situation. It's someone looking at the connection through a much more balanced lens. They seem to be acknowledging things they once avoided. Acknowledging your perspective. Acknowledging your effort. Acknowledging the emotional weight you carried. For some of you, I almost feel like this person has replayed old conversations enough times to finally hear what you were actually trying to say. Not what they thought you meant. What you truly meant. That creates a different kind of understanding. A more mature understanding. There is also a feeling here that they respect you more than ever before. Not simply because of what you did. Because of who you are. Because of how you handled yourself. Because you continued moving forward even when things felt uncertain. Because you chose dignity over drama. And Capricorn, that seems to matter a lot more to them than they expected. The Justice card feels like somebody wanting to meet you from a place of honesty rather than confusion. Wanting to approach from a place of accountability rather than avoidance. Wanting things to feel real. You know, I keep hearing the phrase, I understand it differently now. That phrase keeps repeating itself. Almost like they're looking at the same story with entirely new eyes. The Six of Wands appears, and something interesting happens. For the first time in a while, I don't just feel regret. I don't just feel fear. I feel hope. Careful hope. Measured hope. The kind that grows quietly after someone starts believing change is actually possible. This card feels connected to confidence. Not the old confidence that comes from ego. A different confidence. The confidence that develops when somebody has faced uncomfortable truths and survived them. The confidence that develops when somebody stops running. I keep seeing someone who is beginning to believe they can become a better version of themselves. And that belief seems important, because growth becomes much easier when people stop seeing themselves as trapped by their past mistakes. There is also an awareness that trust isn't built through promises. Trust is built through consistency. Through actions, through showing up, through doing what you say you're going to do. That realization feels very strong here. Especially because Capricorn energy naturally values reliability. This person seems to understand that much more clearly than they once did. The Ten of Pentacles arrives, and the entire reading settles into something calmer. More grounded. More stable. What stands out to me is that this doesn't feel focused on temporary emotions. It feels focused on what truly matters over time. The people we choose. The relationships we invest in. The life we build. The memories we create. The support we offer each other. There is something deeply human about this energy. Almost as if this person is beginning to understand that fulfillment doesn't come from constantly chasing the next thing. Sometimes it comes from recognizing the value of what has already touched your life. And Capricorn, when I look at this card, I don't see somebody thinking only about a moment. I see somebody thinking about significance, about meaning, about what deserves a place in their future. There is a steadiness here that wasn't present before. Less confusion, less resistance, more clarity, more intention, more willingness to take life seriously. Yet one feeling continues to linger beneath everything I'm seeing. Because after all the reflection, all the growth, all the realizations, and all the inner changes, there still seems to be one question quietly sitting inside their heart as they look toward the path ahead. I feel like that's where we're going to leave this energy for today, Capricorn. There are still some things unfolding beneath the surface, and sometimes the most meaningful changes happen quietly, long before anyone talks about them out loud. Trust yourself. Trust what your heart is showing you. And most importantly, don't forget how valuable you truly are. The energy in this reading keeps coming back to that lesson again and again. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this time with me. I never take that for granted. Capricorn, you are deeply appreciated, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next reading. Until then, be kind to yourself, keep moving forward, and take care.
All right. Bye-bye.